Hello, my friends, hello, and welcome once again to Stately Vaughan Manor, where Roger and I have returned for the first video of the new year. But instead of doing like a special New Year's video, I'm just talking about comic books. Because it's also Wednesday. That means it's Epic Comic Book Wednesday. Every Wednesday, we'll talk about a certain comic book, graphic novel, or comic book subject. Steve Donoghue on his channel usually will talk about the same comic book, graphic novel, or comic book subject. It is our world's finest team up that we do once a week. Steve Donoghue is still on hiatus. Season 8 of the Steve Donoghue Show wrapped up a couple weeks ago, and the season 9 premiere hasn't been announced yet, but I'm assuming it'll happen sometime within the next week or two. We'll see. But for now, Roger and I are on our own, so we decided to talk about DC Comics and the next 10 DC Comics that I'm going to read. And I was inspired to do this because of DC Comics kind of turning it around as far as the reprint program is concerned. You might have noticed if you watched this dumb channel for a while that I've complained once in a while about DC Comics reprint program and how terrible it's been. They'll start a reprint series and then they'll just stop it. They'll change cover designs inexplicably. I mean, they've done some odd things when it comes to their reprint program, which is a shame because they've got a ton of stuff to reprint. I mean, DC Comics has a vast history of publishing comic books. So I was very happy when the DC Finest line of trade paperbacks started appearing. A new series from DC Comics where they are reprinting different series. It's basically their version of Marvel Epic Collections. And I've been saying they needed to do that for years and years, and finally they've started to do it. I think it's been a success. I've heard that a lot of these have been selling out at different comic book stores. So that's good. That's good. I hope DC Finest volumes are sold for years. And that got me into reading DC Comics again. And so I decided, along with my Marvel Master Plan, I'll read DC Comics as well. Now, with the Marvel comics I'm reading one series after the other. I read all of Thor from the first run of Thor. I'm reading all of Fantastic Four right now from the first run of the Fantastic Four. And that's been great. With DC, you can't really do that because, like, you can't read all of the first run of Superman. It went on forever. And they've got so many characters. So I'm going to take inspiration from the DC Finest series itself and jump around in DC's history. And considering that the DC Finest reprint program is the inspiration for my reading, it's surprising that there's only one volume here in this set of books. Oh well, only one DC Finest. That's okay. I have taken inspiration from that series, and some of these have been reprinted in the DC Finest series recently. Right now, at this very moment, I'm reading all of the Silver Age Justice League, which I've gotten 2 omnibus volumes. As soon as I'm done with those 2 volumes, I'm going to start on these. So the first volume here, the next DC Comics book I'm going to be reading, is a pretty important one. This is Crisis on Infinite Earths. Crisis on Infinite Earths, the series, the event that changed DC Comics and really changed comic books in a way, because this series revamped the entire DC line and basically started DC over again. Superman, for example, pretty much started over from scratch with John Byrne's Superman. George Perez went and redid Wonder Woman. The other books were a little inconsistent as far as how revamped they became and how changed the characters' continuities became, and it was somewhat confused. this was a bit of a mess. It wasn't as big of a mess as the New 52 was as far as continuity was concerned, but it was a bit of a mess. I mean, the way they reintroduced Wonder Woman to the rest of the DC characters was a little silly and inconsistent because it ruined the entire history of the Justice League, so they had to make a bunch of changes to that. It wasn't particularly well thought out as far as how this was going to affect the DC universe. But it was a success. This was a very successful miniseries. And it did get interest back to DC Comics. Like Superman under John Byrne started to sell very well. People started to read Superman again. And it was very helpful for the sales of DC Comics. So there was that. And it did get me into reading Superman. And so that's a good thing. But I haven't read this miniseries. I don't think I've read this since it came out, maybe. I can't remember rereading this. So there's a lot in here I don't remember. It does have fantastic Marv Wolfman art. Excuse me. Perez art. George Perez art. Marv Wolfman was the writer. But this has fantastic artwork by George Perez. It was just remarkable. And yeah, Marv Wolfman writes it. So this is the first book out of the 10 that I've got here that I'm going to be reading, Crisis on Infinite Earths. I look forward to reading that. And the next one is Superman. Of course, it's got to be Superman, and it's Golden Age Superman. This is Golden Age Superman Omnibus Volume 3. I read the first 2 Golden Age Superman omnibuses. Was it last year or the year before, Roger? I can't remember. Roger can't remember either. But I did read those first 2. I've got all of the Golden Age Superman omnibuses that have been printed so far. I don't know if they're going to continue with this or not. Like I said, they've been inconsistent with the reprint lines, but we'll see. But I am going to be reading this because this has Superman stories that I've never read. I've never read any of the stories, I don't think, that have been in this volume, unless some of these have been reprinted in some best of Superman anthology, which some of them might have been. But for the most part, these are Superman stories from the Golden Age that I have never read. So that's going to be kind of cool. I love Superman. Superman is my favorite character. I love Superman. Love him. So yeah, Golden Age Superman. Going to be reading that. This is Volume 3. Going to continue that series. And then I'm missing something. Hold on. I'm back. Man, we're professionals, Roger. I forgot the list. That I had the list. I wrote all these down so I have them in the correct order. Not that it even matters, but yes, the next one I'm going to be reading is Wonder Woman by George Perez. This is the Wonder Woman series that George Perez took over. This is his run on Wonder Woman that happened after Crisis on Infinite Earths. So they needed to jumpstart Wonder Woman after that event, and they got George Perez to do it. And one thing I remember about this is that the artwork was pretty fantastic. George Perez is a legend. And so, yeah, I remember the artwork being glorious on this set of books. War! So I'm looking forward to reading this because, again, these are comics I haven't read since they came out. I got this omnibus, I can't remember when this omnibus came out, but I got it a while ago. Always intending to get to it, I just haven't. But I remember this being pretty good, but it's been so long since I've read it, I couldn't really give an opinion on it, because I know when I read it now, it's going to seem very different than it did when I was, how old when this came out? 15, 16 years old? So it's been a while since I've read this stuff. And I look forward to it. I recently read the Wonder Woman book that came out in DC Finest, and that was great. So yeah, it inspired me to read more Wonder Woman, and I have to go with this one because it's George Perez. There you go. there's that. So the next book I'm going to be reading from DC is the Flash Omnibus. This is the Silver Age Flash Omnibus Volume 1. A lot of this was recently reprinted in the DC Finest series, which is great that they're reprinting this stuff again. But this is the Omnibus, and this is the first printing of the Omnibus, where Flash meets Gorilla Grodd, you know? Gotta have an evil genius gorilla. I love the Flash. The Flash is probably, after Superman, my favorite DC character. So it's going to be fun to read the Silver Age Flash again. This is the character that brought back superheroes in a big way. There were still some superheroes published by DC at this time in the late 50s. Superman was still there, Wonder Woman, Batman, Aquaman was still swimming around. But superheroes were pretty much over until the Flash returned. And he returned in this new incarnation. He was a Golden Age hero. And I wish DC Comics would start publishing those Golden Age Flash stories so I could actually read them. Hopefully we'll get some of those in the DC Finest series. But the Silver Age Flash is, of course, my Flash, and I'm looking forward to reading his stories again. I've got all of the Silver Age Flash Omnibus volumes. In fact, I think I've got almost all of the Flash Omnibus volumes that have been published. I got a lot of Flash, man. I love this character. So yeah, the Flash. I'm going to read him. The next book is actually a DC Finest volume, and that is The Justice Society for America and Democracy, DC's first super team, the Justice Society. And these are the Golden Age stories of the Justice Society that began in 1940. This has stories from 1940 to 1942. And I have never read any of these. I've never read any of this stuff. So I am really happy to finally get the opportunity to read this stuff. There's old Hawkman. Golden Age Hawkman. Yeah, I'm excited to read this stuff. Gardner Fox, I think, wrote all of these stories, if I'm remembering correctly. But I've never read them. They had been reprinted a number of years ago, I guess in the 90s. These were reprinted in hardcover from DC in the archive editions. But I don't know that they've ever been published since. I don't think so. So this is pretty exciting. The Justice Society of America for America and Democracy. This is going to be awesome. I'm very happy to read that. Next, going back to the Silver Age with Green Lantern. The Silver Age Green Lantern Omnibus Volume 1. These are the first stories of Green Lantern. They're awesome. Gil Kane. Great Gil Kane artwork in here. So, yeah, Green Lantern. Silver Age Green Lantern. A lot of these have been reprinted recently in the DC Finest series, but they didn't start with the first few issues of Green Lantern from the Silver Age. I'm not sure why, but they didn't. But all of those issues, I think, are in here. So I'm just going to read all of this because I've got the first two Silver Age Green Lantern Omnibus volumes. I think they were only 2 volumes, and I think they collected all of the Silver Age Green Lantern stuff. So this is volume 1 of that, and I'm going to read this. Green Lantern, he's awesome. So there you go. After Green Lantern, it's time for Batman. You were all wondering, where the hell is Batman? Well, here he is. Now, this is a Showcase Presents volume. This was a series from DC Comics that was published as their answer to Marvel Comics Essential volumes. These were cheap, black and white reprints published on newsprint. Cheap as cheap can be. But they were awesome. And this is Batman from I think this started in 1964. Yeah. These stories started in 1964 when Batman gets the oval around his bat on his chest. It was his new look. And so it's the mid 60s Batman. Still Silver Age Batman. I recently read the Silver Age Batman Omnibus Volume 1. I think I read that last year. And that was pretty good. These stories take place later. I don't know when DC will reprint these. I'm assuming eventually these will be reprinted in the DC Finest line, but who knows when that could be. That could be years from now. I have no idea. But I've got them here. I've got the first few Showcase Presents Batman volumes. So, yeah, Batman. And a bunch of Batman stories. I've read some of these, I'm sure, but I've never read all of these. I've never read this Showcase volume, even though I've had it for years and years. Now I'm actually going to read it. Showcase Presents Batman, Volume 1. Over 500 pages of comics. You can never have too much comics. Next, another omnibus volume. And this is another one of my favorite DC characters. It's Swamp Thing. It's Swamp Thing. This is the Bronze Age Swamp Thing Omnibus. So this has all of the Swamp Thing comics that came before Alan Moore took over the book. So this goes right from the very beginning to when Alan Moore took over Swamp Thing as the writer. So this is pretty cool. This is a pretty cool thing to have. And of course, Swamp Thing is awesome. We've got Bernie Wrightson artwork in here. Very creepy stuff. It's great. It's awesome. I love Swamp Thing. He is definitely one of my favorite DC characters. Don't know when or if the DC Finest volumes will start publishing Swamp Thing. I assume they will eventually. But this is great stuff if you like this kind of thing, and I most definitely do. So yeah, I've been intending to read Swamp Thing again, to get to Swamp Thing. I've never read the whole of Swamp Thing, although I've got a lot of it. And yeah, this has a lot of Swamp Thing comics that just hadn't been reprinted anywhere for the longest time. And like I said, I hope DC Finest gets to this stuff, but I have this, so I'm cool. So I'm going to read that. And next, I'm going to torture myself. I'm going to torture myself by forcing myself to read Aquaman. You know, there has to be something to this character, right? Because this is a character that has been published forever. You know, he's been published since the Golden Age, right? Didn't Aquaman start off in the Golden Age? And he was just swimming around all of that time in DC Comics as a backup feature in this or that book. Sometimes he gets his own comic book. And, you know, at this point, he's had a couple movies. One of them I hear was decent, although I didn't see it. So Aquaman. Now, this is another Showcase Presents volume. Although, I think in about a week from the time of this recording, there is going to be a DC Finest edition coming out. I don't know if it's going to contain the stories in this Showcase Presents volume or not. It looks like it might, but I won't know until I actually get it. So I just have this black and white volume for the moment, which is fine with me. My color vision is so terrible that, you know, I actually don't mind black and white comics. I don't mind them. So I might end up, this might probably be the volume I actually read. It all depends on what is published and how much is published in that DC Finest volume. But I've also got a couple more Showcase Presents volumes of Aquaman to read after this one. So I'm going to read this. We'll see how I feel about it. Aquaman so far, for the most part, has failed to impress. I mean, he's no Submariner. But, you know, I'm going to read it. I'm going to read it. Aquaman. Now, the last book out of the 10 books is another Superman volume. You know I love Superman. And this is another omnibus. This is Superman the Exile omnibus. The Exile and Other Stories. And this has a bunch of Superman stories that came at the towards the end of the 1980s. So this is the Superman as revamped by John Byrne. But this is after John Byrne left the book. John Byrne didn't stick around on Superman terribly long. He stuck around, I think, for a few years to restart Superman and wipe out a bunch of really cool things like Crypto. I got rid of Crypto, man. That was lame. Crypto came back eventually. And Crypto's going to be in the movies, Roger. We saw the trailer for the new Superman movie. It looks like it's going to be great, but I've seen good trailers for bad movies before, so we'll see. But it does have Crypto in it, so there's that. This, however, does not have Crypto, as far as I'm aware. This just has John Byrne's Superman after John Byrne left. And this takes place before the Triangle era of Superman in the 90s, when Superman basically became a weekly comic book written and drawn by different people, but the plot lines would continue from one issue to the next. It was a fun era for Superman. One of my favorite eras, actually. And I bought all of those issues. And I got all of these issues too. And these are all collected in this omnibus. So post John Byrne, pre-Triangle era Superman. It's going to be fun to read this. I'm glad they're finally putting out Superman omnibuses, you know, because Superman has been underserved in the omnibus department. So yeah, those are the next 10 DC Comics volumes that I'll be reading. It should be fun. I'll read those and then I'll choose another 10. It'll be thrilling, Roger, like everything else I do on this channel. I probably won't see you for a few days. I'll be back at least by Saturday to do my book of the week. I will catch you next time.